Audio version of David's Choice by The Alternative Facts Bulletin Australia. Text version available at wordpress.com. Disclosure contains irony, sarcasm, and bald lies. Definitions of truth vary. 1. The Biloela Cell. The plight of successive immigration ministers, Peter Dutton, then David Coleman, in their long struggle against a married couple and their children, highlights the challenge of being cruel to little folk in order to be kind to the cruel. The enemy apparent is a Tamil couple, originally from Sri Lanka, who, quote, trick the locals, unquote, of Biloela, Queensland, into believing they are law-abiding, contributing, and very welcome members of their community. The dangerous duo also duped the Queen's Commonwealth of Australia into supplying them with permits validating their lawful presence in the country. Incredibly, the husband had the audacity to find a job, work hard and pay taxes. Such was the skill of these insidious infiltrators that their plot to live quietly in Biloela went unfoiled for several years, until a poll-battered Liberal National government noticed an opportunity to win points with ultra-conservatives. But then, just as Peter Dutton was about to smite the dangerous family with his mighty hammer of justice, a motley crew of lawyers, journalists, and Biloela folk stood up and said, no. There followed several months of battle to prevent Mr. Dutton carrying out his duty to the Queen of England. Many hours of self-righteous pleasuring have been savored by meme artists pasting Peter Dutton's features into Nazi uniform, or onto the shoulders of Voldemort, etc. And Twitter quippers did rejoice whenever the trending villain strode forth from his bunker. Apparently, Mr. Dutton is widely seen as callous, ignorant, petty, and morally multiplicitous. He thus attracts generalized resentment from folks who would prefer that their members of parliament, elected by the average Australian, serve as inspiration rather than proof of the awful truth. 2. Fair dinkum Aussie fair go. In August 2018, the harmless-looking and usually reticent David Coleman succeeded Lightning Rod Dutton as immigration minister. The latter was kicked upstairs with instructions to minimize public appearances and not be tricked into an interview with ABC's Lee Sales, at least not before the election. Names change, but the mission remains. All Mr. Coleman wants to do is deport a couple of foreigners, explained a cowering minion. As a bonus, Mr. Coleman is also offering to exile their Aussie-born daughters, Kopika and Tharunakar, who, according to Peter Dutton, should not have been born in the first place. Technically, the girls committed nothing contestable with their method of arrival in Australia, and so Australia will allow them to keep their Australian birth certificates. Perhaps they will one day frame them, and nail them to the wall beside a souvenir boomerang, handcrafted in Indonesia, and the ever-ironic, so-called Australian flag. As a further gesture of goodwill, Mr. Coleman will expel the family together, on the same plane, in adjacent seats, even though this concession is likely to encumber the department when haggling with airlines. As far as Mr. Coleman can tell, the main reason the family dreads deportation to Sri Lanka is their misunderstanding of that country. Fortunately, Mr. Coleman can reassure them, having recently become an expert on Sri Lanka thanks to a report prepared for him by the Australian Department of Immigration. The document was once called Sri Lanka, a report prepared for Mr. Dutton, but was retitled Sri Lanka, a report prepared for Mr. Coleman. In said tome, David learned that Sri Lanka is a utopia where joyful peasants frolic through daisy-spangled meadows, strum languidly on lutes, and improvise commemorative poetry about a pack of wild dogs who one day, for some reason, promised to permanently suppress their natural inclination, thenceforth to only gently nuzzle fluffy ducklings, bunny rabbits, and Tamils, rather than eat them. It is known, to those who know things, that in Sri Lanka, during the previous 12 months, not a single Tamil has accidentally fallen downstairs, or been accidentally shot by a policeman who was only joking and didn't know the gun was loaded, or been accidentally denied employment or adequate shelter, or been otherwise disadvantaged due to past affiliation or present ethnicity. It has also been verified that Australian-born children, deposited in Sri Lanka, are just as safe from disease, poverty, renewed warfare, and other harms, as are Sri Lankan children. It's true. These particulars have been documented by the UN, ICRC, World Health Organization, as well as MSF, Human Rights Watch, and various others whose only reason to exist is to persecute the Commonwealth Government of Australia. Meanwhile, researchers and statisticians, working more or less voluntarily for the government in the disciplines of pediatric health and education, have concluded that Sri Lanka is not too bad, relatively speaking. The children from Biloela should be okay, said one consultant. But don't quote me, he added. Indeed, according to comparative data, there are plenty of Australian children who would be better off in Sri Lanka, if only they could get themselves deported. 3. The Broad Church. Despite mathematical summaries, and firmly worded declarations by politocrats, several members of Australia's peasantry persist in appeals for clemency for the Aussie-born girls, and their parents. A petition to that effect, at change.org, has attracted more than 100,000 signatures. Meanwhile, Mr. Coleman's Liberal Party colleagues, nervous of the party's poor polling with Lutherans, left-leaning conservatives, and right-leaning swing voters, are WhatsApping him with conflicting recommendations as to what he should do next. Other colleagues, as well as Mr. Coleman's boss, Mr. Dutton, prefer the traditional Canberra method of sharing ideas, shouting over the telephone, or shouting across a desk, or shouting in a room in which others are shouting. Mr. Coleman now finds himself trapped in the notorious Broad Church of liberal values. Fully liberal liberals will, amongst their brethren, roll their eyes at the mere mention of words like clemency, while the subtly derided, small l liberals feel that a timely display of common sense might induce voters to be more merciful during the impending electoral purge. One of the softer-hearted liberalists, who spoke on condition of anonymity, commented on what he sees as a potential new, toxic hazard posed by the Biloela family. Some say that if we can get them gone before March we should be clear for the election. But they've forgotten about the social media. The family will be under a microscope for months, and every time one of those bloody kids sneezes we're going to have a Twitter snit. Then you've got those bitches at ABC. Don't even start me on those bitches. What kind of a country is it when a minister of the Queen's Commonwealth can't appear on ABC without being cross-examined till he looks like a stunned mullet? They do it deliberately, you know. They train for it for years. One day they're playing with Barbie's hairdressing salon, and the next they're plotting the downfall of the country. That's what you get from free education. It's a bloody outrage. Anyway, with our luck one of those kids is bound to get dysentery in election week. Or rheumatic heart disease. Or dad will have an accident in the back of a paddy wagon, or they'll get evicted onto the street, or any number of things that happen in a shithouse country like that. It'll happen right in election week, guaranteed, and then we'll look like a bunch of cunts, excuse my French. 4. The lowest common denominator. In a recent focus group project, commissioned by a luncheon club linked to the Liberal Party, an attempt was made to more accurately discern voters' intentions through the study of their children in school. The study took advantage of a stage of intellectual development, observed in many children, when the child appears to mimic the attitudes of the parents. In one session, conducted in a lower middle class, marginal liberal electorate, the children were asked to use paints and crayons to illustrate liberal government. The results included depictions of eagles feasting on puppies, various supervillains wearing Union Jacks, and a somewhat overwrought study of vampires preying on a little pony named Fluttershy. Fact check: Fluttershy is a popular character in the socialist propaganda Trojan, My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Meanwhile, an attempt to serve 8 children in an incorrigibly poor neighborhood of Hobart had to be abandoned when the little cherubs, stirred to a passion, seized 3 classrooms, and proclaimed the First Republic of the glorious, patriotic and heroic proletariat of Tasmania. 5. Conclusion, David's choice. Since a spectacular March 2018 raid on the Biloela family's lair, which was brilliantly planned and executed by a squad of elite stormtroopers, the dangerous family has been held under armed guard in Melbourne. During these 9 months, experts monitoring the Aussie-born child captives have reported that the progressive effects of their captivity remain within limits that are acceptable to the Department of Immigration. It is said that good things are worth waiting for, or working for, or both, and in this case the Commonwealth Government of Australia, under the muscular command of the Liberal Party, has certainly worked both long and hard to vanquish the latest straw proxy. No doubt Mr. Menzies would have an opinion about the family waiting in Melbourne. After all, he did espouse that things be done thoroughly, and that the Australian people be defended against anyone who might threaten their purity of virtue. Expulsion of the family was to occur just days before Christmas, but a deferment until February was arranged so as to deny to cartoonists a turkey shoot. Naturally, nobody in the Liberal Party of Australia would like to be mistaken for a cold, heartless bastard. Even at this late stage there remain some annoying loose ends to be snipped off, things to do with nominal rule of law and democracy. There is also that pesky petition, at change.org, which will soon be delivered to the government, on camera, unless it can somehow be stopped. And, as always, there will come a moment when someone will have to make a choice that will lead to various consequences. To find out how you can help return the family to where they belong, i.e., Biloela, Queensland, Australia, search Twitter using the hashtag #HomeToBilo, spelt B-I-L-O. Alternatively, to apply the Darwinian principle, and let nature take its course, simply do nothing. Thank you for listening and thinking.